Welcome for all of you who are watching. You're tuned into TMH, and this is our English Daily News. Our headlines for today: the U.S. says its special envoy remains in the region to support implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. Brinkmanship cited for break in the vital Ethiopian peace signature, and BBC investigations confirm perpetrators of massacres on civilians in Chafarobit of the Amhara region. Moving on to our main updates, the U.S. says its special envoy remains in the region to support implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price told reporters yesterday that Mike Hammer is in the region, adding that the U.S. stands ready to support the parties along with the international parties and partners on the implementation of such agreement. Let's take a listen.
The parties are in Nairobi, in keeping with the provision that the Ethiopian National Defense Fund and the Tigrayan Defense Force would meet within 5 days to work out the implementation. Also, as provided by the agreement, a hotline has been established between the two senior-most commanders. These concrete implementation steps reflect a commitment by both parties to quote-unquote silence the guns, but more work remains. We understand the agenda for the Nairobi talks will also include the urgent need to expedite humanitarian assistance and restoration of services for Tigray and adjoining affected regions of Afar and Amhara in accordance with the cessation of hostilities agreement. The talks are being presided over by the AU high-level panel of former presidents of Obasanjo and Kenyatta, the AU Commission, and with participation of Kenyan and South African generals. The observers include the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, and the U.S., represented by our Special Envoy, Mike Hammer. Our Special Envoy is remaining in the region to support implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. We stand ready to continue to support the parties along with the international partners on implementation of the agreement.
While the implementation of the agreement is taking place in Kenya, Eritrea says time to close shop in response to the Ethiopian Tigrayan cessation of hostilities agreement. Ethiopia's lead negotiator, Redwan Hussein, made an implicit reference to Eritrea as a third party, which may want to spoil the peace process. Eritrea responded to that through its Minister of Information, Yamana Gabrameskel. Without mentioning names, Yamana wrote on his official Twitter account that what he dubbed the Myrads riffraff were in total disarray. He added that the most rabid elements are venting through frustration on Eritrea. Time to close up shop, said Yamana. In other news, Eritrean media known as Eritrean Peace Agency Amharic warned the Amhara regional government not to accept the peace agreement signed in Pretoria, short if it does not satisfy the rights, interests, as well as the identity and territorial demands of the Amharan people. As Eritrea continues to stall the peace agreement and the cessation of hostilities, UN estimates now more than 800,000 civilians may have died in the 2-year war on this ongoing Tigrayan conflict. According to United Nations estimate, more than 800,000 civilians may have died since November 2020, most of whom may be directed and indirect of casualties of the war through lack of food or medical supplies. Another 2 million may have been displaced internally or as refugees in neighboring Sudan. Brinkmanship cited for a break in vital Ethiopia peace signature. The East African reported, quoting inside sources, that the deal signed in Pretoria, South Africa last week would not have been realized had the parties not seen the cost of war, sources told the East African on Thursday. Ethiopians may this week leave and heave a collective sigh of relief after the government reached a cessation of hostilities and the agreement with the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, signaling an end to a 2-year war in the north region of the country. But the deal signed in Pretoria, South Africa last week would not have been realized had the parties not seen the cost of war, as the sources told East African on Thursday. East Africa reported, quoting an African official familiar with the behind-the-scenes happenings in Pretoria, that one of the facts tabled before the parties was the mounting toll on civilians as well as combatants. The East African reported that human toll both on civilians and through war and starvation and disease is extremely huge. The agreement was made after multiple back and forths, open and closed, larger and small group debates. As Redwan said on Thursday, eventually the parties adopted a proposal by former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. The proposal formed the basis for key provisions of this agreement. The East African disclosed that Kenyatta has tabled these proposals last year to the Ethiopian government when he was still in power, but Addis Ababa declined. This time, Ethiopia agreed to the proposal because of officials how they saw the burden would be on the TPLF to disarm. It is called negotiation brinkmanship. It's also got to do with the fact that protagonists made themselves clear they are tired of war, as the East African quoted one of Kenyatta's aides saying on Friday. East African sources added that international pressure also contributed to this outcome, and actually our leaders, the mediators, did a lot more to demonstrate the losses likely to befall on both sides, and it seemed to work, but the next steps would be respecting their commitments. The deal, titled Agreement for Lasting Peace Through a Permanent Cessation of Hostilities, sets its objective is to reach an immediate and permanent cessation of hostilities, allow return to constitutional order, as well as unfettered humanitarian access. Critics charged the deal and promised peace without explaining how to deal with breakers of this peace. Mahari Tadele Maru, who's an Ethiopian academic and a part-time professor at the School of Transitional Governance and the Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute, argued that the deal is welcome in promising an end to violence, but leaves questions unanswered. The COHA unmistakably fails to mention the withdrawal of Eritrean and other forces, he said, referring to the Eritrean forces who have fought alongside the Ethiopian forces. Eritrea did not participate in the talks, although Addis Ababa claimed it represented their side of the story. How can Tigray Defense Forces disarm in the presence of Eritrean Defense Forces in Tigray? Can Ethiopian National Defense Force and the Eritrean Defense Force, accused of atrocity crimes against Tigrayans, provide the security to the same population? Will the Tigray population trust these forces, as he asked and he posed? The Ethiopian government has denied any deliberate targeting of non-combatants in a conflict that has now led to many thousands of civilian deaths. BBC Reality Check's investigation, based on a video showing a massacre of unarmed men, reveals the massacre took place in Chafarobit Oromia zone of the Amhara region, that it was carried out by pro-government Fano militia and the Amhara Special Forces. Let's watch.
My brother lived in Kamise with his wife and children. When government forces came, they went door to door collecting information. They arrested him, and later they took me too. My brother was taken to a military base nearby and held with many others. After 2 days, they were put on truck, taken away, and all killed.
This massacre happened last December, but the images were posted online many months later. It happened after men from the minority Oromo community in this part of the Amhara region were rounded up and detained. Let's watch.
Oromo activists abroad posted these videos online. In this one, showing the mass graves, a hill line, distinctive shrubbery, the flat bank of a dry gully, and a telephone mast are clearly visible. All the key elements of the video of the shootings match with those of the aftermath images. Stitching together frames from the videos to build up a landscape, we were able to pinpoint the location. The roadside can be precisely located to an area named by local residents near a town called Shefarobit. Multiple sources told us the Oromo men were held at a military base in Kemise, and we were able to identify the only route the truck carrying the detainees could have taken.
Witness testimonies and the video footage revealed the brutality of the conflict within Ethiopia currently. As we move on to our final update for today, a deal has been reached between the government and Ethiopian and Tigrayan forces for a permanent ceasefire in the country's civil war. And this deal, which was signed last week in Pretoria, South Africa, has left a majority of the diaspora with questions unanswered. Although that has not deterred them in the slightest bit from continuing to advocate for justice and for the international community to do more. A week after the deal was signed, Tigray region is still under siege, with aid still halted, communications blackout still in effect, and no medical supplies available to those in need. On the second-year commemoration weekend, the Tigray diaspora came together in the District of Columbia for a demonstration in which they managed to shut down one of the busiest highways, Interstate 395 South, for almost 3 hours. From Seattle to the DMV, the diaspora community has been relentlessly working on advocating in many ways to make sure justice is served. Let's watch.
عبرم تجدا يتنقم نعارب سعارة ينأتو جهد زجبر عبرم دقاسم ملحاس ومن كأسو يسبر كسمو عبرم ذحافر يحفر على الزبانو عبرم يبلبل عبرم يا عزبتاي وترب ستو عشان كبادة يهربتو سقادي بالمسواتي لأخته معوتي سقادي بالمسواتي لأخته معوتي أبو طنعت حوصنكا وريسانا يديتاتا وعلو تقراي كحليتي عطلتهم تنكتي عاتقا تقراويتي عمبر كفانتك أبرم فرقيدا أنا يدخي أنا يدخي بدك النيدا إعسال نبوة أغمسل
But this genocide is just as much as America's as it is European countries. Genocide is a crime against humanity. Every single human being, it is their duty. It is our duty to end this genocide. Seattle to DC, who are we? Justice! What do we want?
تجراي تجادلاي عودنا سياسي تجادلاي ستم سرعي عودنا سياسي
Thank you, Brooke Tawalda, for such amazing footage. On that note, that wraps up our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.